Welcome to the Bitcoin Podcast by CCN, where we discuss the latest trends, companies, and people shaping the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Jake Sylvester. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the very first episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. This week, we're going to discuss the continuing price drops, the aftermath of Bithumb's hack, Pornhub's decision to accept not one but two new cryptocurrencies, and why that has some people angry. Finally, we're going to interview ShipChain CEO John Monarch and talk about how cryptocurrencies and blockchain are revolutionizing the way logistics happens. So across the market, we've had a relatively disappointing week as far as price goes, with Bitcoin down 8% for the second week in a row, Ethereum down 13%, and the entire market down around 8%, a big part of that coming off of Ripple, which is down around 12% this week. So despite the seemingly months-long price decline, many investors remain optimistic. First of all, we saw an 11% price surge practically overnight late last week, which ended up adding around $26 billion to the market cap. On top of that, we recently found out that Mt. Gox, which was the victim of a massive hacking attack in 2014, resulting in its bankruptcy and the sale of hundreds of thousands of bitcoins to repay creditors, would be stopped until Q1 of next year. Finally, we've still got some pretty big bulls behind us. Just last week, the co-founder of both Cardano and Ethereum claimed that a new wave of regulation will bring trillions of dollars into the market. On top of that, the CEO of exchange BitMEX claimed that even if Bitcoin bottomed out at $3,000, it could still reach $50,000 by the end of the year, a prediction he's been standing by since he made it. Time will only tell if the bulls are right or if the bears will prevail, but at the end of the day, we still have a lot of optimism in the market, despite the recent price declines. In other news, Bithumb, which has been hacked 3 times this year, has recovered nearly half the funds stolen in a massive attack the week before last by coordinating with other cryptocurrency exchanges around the world. It's notable that in the most recent attack, only the hot wallet funds were stolen, but it's still a pretty massive attack, and Korean regulators had blamed this attack for causing them to finally introduce regulation into the largely unregulated crypto space in Korea. Next up, Pornhub has announced that in addition to Verge, it will now also accept Tron and Zencash as payments for premium content. It's attributed this decision to the fact that both Tron and Zencash focus on anonymity. This announcement has some supporters of Verge pretty mad because earlier this year, they conducted a crowdfunding campaign to raise money to make an exclusive partnership with Pornhub happen. Many expressed their anger on Twitter, paired with what sounded like some contempt for Verge's other recent missteps, which include almost falling prey to a 51% attack that would have likely rendered the coin useless. In any case, it'll be interesting to see how this move affects the prices of all 3 currencies, and what it means long-term for other sites that may want to accept anonymous payments. In other news, popular messaging app Kik's cryptocurrency has finally gone live. Prior to entering the crypto space, Kik had already raised well over $100 million in venture capital. They followed this up with their Kin ICO, which managed to raise yet another $100 million. Users can now earn Kin by completing microtasks such as quizzes and answering polls. Tokens can then be used to purchase digital items such as premium themes in the app. While I think this is an interesting use case, it hardly fulfills their promise of a crypto economy through their Kin token integration. It'll be interesting to see how they evolve this, and when they do, whether we'll have a big wealth disparity between users that were completing quizzes because they had access to this feature early and those that got it later on. Either way, the app has one of the largest user bases of any app that's attempted to integrate cryptocurrency before, so whatever they end up doing, it'll definitely be a big step for this space. In other news, Andreessen Horowitz has announced a new cryptocurrency fund. Andreessen Horowitz is a giant venture capital fund that already has equity in some crypto plays like Coinbase, and they say they're going to be investing for the next 5 to 10 years. The fund will be investing in everything from early stage startups to networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which could have positive price pressure. Overall, the vote of confidence is important in a Silicon Valley that is sometimes skeptical of the benefits of blockchain. Finally today, we have an interview with ShipChain CEO John Monarch. ShipChain has raised over $30 million to build a fully integrated supply chain solution and solve one of the biggest problems facing logistics today. In the era of Amazon, I talked to John Monarch about how packages go missing, the massive shortage of truck drivers today, and how blockchain can help solve all these problems. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did recording it. Hey, John, how you doing today?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. So I'm glad to have you on.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate you having me, and glad to discuss logistics and supply chain and the blockchain.
Yeah, I think ShipChain is one of the most interesting companies to come out of this whole blockchain revolution. So for those who don't know, what is it that ShipChain does? What's the problem that it solves?
So ShipChain is looking at taking kind of a holistic approach to the logistics industry right now. The first goal that we have is to unify track and trace on the blockchain itself. So right now, a good example of this is I've been involved in numerous import and exports over time. And sometimes, 5, sometimes 10 individual companies are involved in a transaction. And usually whenever there's a handshake between those companies is where there's an issue with, who has custody of the product, what kind of, visibility issues between systems. So we wanted to unify that. Along with that, we're looking at allowing for individual companies to find and book loads in a much more efficient way while saving some money. And really helping to solve the problem of personnel right now, because, for instance, in the United States alone, there's a shortage of well over 100,000 truck drivers, and that's really not getting any better because the median age for truck drivers in the United States is about 55. So we're not seeing as many millennials want to participate in that industry, which is really unfortunate as trucker pay continues to increase, and we want to use our rewards platform to help add additional incentive, and not only that, but also incentivize the current drivers for what they're already doing a great job at, and that's everything from being more fuel efficient in their driving to being on time to safe driving through their tracking telematics for things like hard braking.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do you even get into an industry like supply chain?
Well, it really depends how you want to be involved in it. My background in it is that I worked a lot with e-commerce companies and started a fulfillment company, and we do a lot of importing and then breaking down a product and shipping out to individual consumers for e-commerce, stores, retailers. But typically about 1 in 10 people are involved in the supply chain in some way, shape, or form. So it's a really large and all-encompassing industry.
That's really interesting. And it's definitely an industry that's ripe for disruption. So speaking of which, one of the things I found most interesting about ShipChain is your advisory team. You guys have an original shark who is also the founder of EO, one of the owners of Purdue Farms, and like 2 or 3 best-selling authors. When you had this initial concept of putting logistics on the blockchain, how did you get started and how did you get all these people involved?
So it really started as a chat between some friends of mine and myself about, I was kind of honestly complaining about some of the problems I was facing in shipping right now, and that included everything from the lack of traceability and visibility to, just the driver shortage. And it kind of blossomed out from there, and we were able to flesh out an idea that, after seeing how Ethereum had evolved and how the blockchain itself had really come to be, that really kind of solved all the problems at once. It's really a lofty goal, but this is one of the first technologies we've seen to really be able to approach it in such a way. After that, it was through our respective networks, getting connected with, like Kevin Harrington, for instance. You mentioned the original shark. He's imported over his career well over $5 billion worth of products. So he understands the problems. I mean, any issue you can think of, he has more than likely faced. So that's where he had a lot of interest in this, and speaks very highly of how blockchain can help on import and export.
And when did you first know that blockchain was the right tool to solve this problem?
The eureka moment kind of came around in April of last year, 2017. So I had been familiar with blockchain, of course, Bitcoin for years. I mean, everyone, when they first heard about it, I initially heard about it when I was in a computer science classes in my undergraduate, because some people had just been discussing it as like, oh, this is, new and upcoming thing. It just got released. And then, I kept an eye on it. And then from 2014, of course, everything blew up the first time. But after that, when Ethereum started making its real play and showing how it's completely programmable, that was when we really had this moment of this is perfect for the supply chain industry.
Yeah, it's really a unique problem, and to have such an all-encompassing solution based on such a new technology is really something novel. And that's probably part of the reason you guys were able to raise $30 million. So I'm curious how raising money for ShipChain was different for you than traditional venture process. And you obviously have a lot of people on your team that are familiar with that process. So talk to me a little bit about how you went about raising money, and how it compares to more traditional venture capital.
There are similarities and differences. We only did a private pre-sale. There was no public sale of SHIP tokens. I would say, just from a purely psychological standpoint, take the traditional venture model, the stresses that come with pitching, the stresses that come with having to do things with that in mind, kind of condense it down even further so it gets an even shorter time frame, more stress. It really was a unique challenge in itself, and we're very excited to have completed it, and with the goal of creating the best product, and that was what really drove us into wanting to keep pushing at it.
Mm-hmm. And were there any unique challenges you faced besides just the scale with raising money this way? I mean, I know back when you were raising the money, a lot of people weren't even sure whether a token offering meant an equity investment.
Well, the regulatory landscape is, it does have its uncertainty right now, and that's something that we've engaged some very experienced counsel on guiding us through. We appreciate their guidance from several firms in this, and it's really kind of difficult to discuss only from a perspective of we don't exactly know a lot about 100% commitment from regulatory bodies yet at this time. We were happy to see that the SEC said that Ethereum itself was not a security, for instance.
Yeah, that was crazy news. That just came out yesterday, right?
Correct.
So does that have any implications for you? I know there was some issues with token sales with ShipChain in particular. Do you see that as a good thing for the industry as a whole? And does that affect the way you're going to do business at all?
I wish I could comment on it. I think that additional regulatory clarity is always a good thing here, but that's really about the most I can say. I mean, we don't see any impact to our actual software development, though, or the products we're delivering.
So another question I have is what people have been calling the Amazon problem. So over the years, Amazon has entered a lot of industries. They went from being a bookstore to the world's largest data company. So one of the things they're looking at now is logistics. And we've seen a lot of this in the hurt stock prices of UPS, FedEx, and the reaction to Amazon becoming a potential competitor in that B2B space. Do you have any concern over someone like an Amazon entering the space, or do you see it as a good thing for vendors like you?
I think it benefits us. I don't see any concern with them in particular. Amazon is attempting to enter the space a bit more because they're trying to solve the last mile problem. And that really has been, the biggest sticking point with a large portion of the logistics industry as more consumers shop at home from their computers. The ability to move freight, pallets of freight, truckloads of freight, even boatloads or whatever between warehouses, between ports is relatively easy because you're dealing with a professional network. Most of the time, these are in central industrial districts versus the last mile can be rather challenging, especially as you start getting into trying to serve rural areas, for instance. So that's where Amazon is contracted out with like a UPS or a United States Postal Service to solve these problems. But they're still seeing challenges with capacity, challenges with delivery times. And so what they're trying to do is, I hate the term, but for lack of a better one, Uberize delivery. But they will still rely on freight movements because Amazon, while they have some trucks, it's not their forte unless they go out and buy someone, which there are rumors that Amazon was looking into like an XPO Logistics, for instance. But it really depends on what their end goal is and how also regulators will handle them in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of concern over Amazon and how they're regulated in general.
Yeah, and I think that they keep a close eye on that, but they also they have a heavy interest in optimizing their internal supply chains as much as possible. But at the same time, have also been moving out to third parties in other aspects. So, for instance, their Fulfillment by Amazon product, they also have been doing seller-fulfilled products a lot. So you'll see these product owners, these sellers that own their own warehouses, able to participate in Amazon Prime without having to send product to Amazon itself. So third-party vendors are a critical part of the ecosystem. And if they can integrate more into the tracking and the tracing and the ability to allow for decentralization, we see that there'd be mutual benefit for us and Amazon.
And on the topic of FBA, I know that's something that you were involved in. That business has been growing by leaps and bounds. And as it's grown, there's been a lot of frustrations from sellers with Amazon, either losing their shipments, saying they received X number of an item when they really received the full amount. And just a lot of contention between Amazon and the sellers that are going through FBA. Is this something you've heard of? And how can ShipChain help solve that problem?
It is, and I'm very familiar with it. I know several people that struggle with sending product to Amazon for FBA. They own stores or they own an Amazon web store. One of the programs that we're implementing with ShipChain is what we're calling our moderator program. So blockchain is a fantastic technology, but at this point, it still does rely on humans to verify things in many ways, especially as you start interacting blockchain with the real world. So these third-party moderators will be participants in our ecosystem that are paid basically to provide a service of validation and verification of actual physical product movement. So these moderators will be able to do as much of a service or as little of a service as is desired by both parties. So a moderator, for instance, could go up to a warehouse loading dock and do an inventory count just to validate things as an independent third party. Or they could, just call along the way, talk to the trucker. Similar to the way some dispatch acts now, except a little more hands-on if they choose to be. So that way they can assist in resolving disputes and making sure that every party is playing fair in the system.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that's definitely a huge problem, especially as Amazon continues to grow.
Oh, and that's all over the place. That's the entire industry needing assistance with that.
So you don't see it as just a Amazon FBA problem, or do you think it's just exacerbated there because of the sheer number of sellers?
I think it's just exacerbated there because it's the most visible too. I mean, it wasn't until recently that someone, mom and pop, could buy a product and then sell it to the world as easy as they can now. And sending it to a big warehouse, it's not something that they're very familiar with. So you've added a lot more actors to the stage, essentially. And these are people who may not be entirely familiar with the process, so you'll get a few more conflicts or some friction as a result of that. And that's where we think having an independent validation body is really helpful.
Definitely. So my final question is where you see your company in 10 years.
I see us validating, tens of thousands of transactions in freight a day. We have explored as a long-term possibility the parcel industry and helping with validation on that, and bringing the blockchain to individual parcels, not just freight. But the roadmap right now, as it stands, is to have that web platform for people to, book freight, track and trace, and actually, interact in the marketplace of freight, contract with the moderators, and then it's going to start with full truckloads, moving on to LTL, and our entire platform is based around intermodal freight. So the ability to move between, ocean to truck to rail or air cargo and any combination thereof in between to really facilitate and make things a lot easier for anyone participating. And that's why we wanted to start with full container load, full truckload, moving on to, LTL and LCL. And then as we, I wouldn't say master, but as we assist those even further and flesh those out, moving into parcel at the end.
That's definitely a big vision.
It is. It's a giant industry, and it's one that I really enjoy working in. I think that there's a lot of good people, and people always say that the logistics industry is slow to move on things, but blockchain has just come out of nowhere. But I think that it was ripe at this time and this technology very specifically, because a lot of things were very fractured previously. Everyone in the industry really kind of universally is not a fan of EDI, electronic data interchange. It's a technology that's been around for close to 70 years, was initially used in the Berlin airlift, which is a bit ridiculous. And it's nowadays an XML standard documents, and it's just a giant pain. No one really likes to work with it, except maybe some EDI vendors. And we'd hope to be a part of replacing that in the long-term vision. As you can tell, this is something that I love talking about, and it's an industry I think that people didn't really notice or know as much about until recently. That the tech world didn't find logistics very sexy up until the past couple of years, which is unfortunate because it's a great industry.
Yeah, it's crazy. The real players I've even heard of are SAP. Obviously, there's a lot there. ShipStation, but that's really about it for SaaS, right?
For the blockchain space, there are others that are looking into it, and there are others that are building different types of platforms. We, to our knowledge, are one of the only ones doing that entire and holistic approach to the process, rather than just focusing on, say, okay, well, here's bill of lading, here's this, trucking, here's this aspect. And we wanted to take that whole approach, because that way you have one standardized system to solve many problems, rather than continuing the fracturing of systems.
Yeah, definitely. All right. It was awesome talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are only those of its host and guest, and sometimes of no one at all. The Bitcoin Podcast, produced by Rockwood Audio and hosted by ccn.com. To find out more about CCN and the podcast, check us out at ccn.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CryptoCoinNews. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe.